Hello, all, and welcome to our webinar on pay and total reward strategy for 2024 and beyond. My name is Sriram Iyer. I'm the founder and CEO of HRTech. We are a Singapore headquartered HRTech solutions and analyst firm. Our singular aim has been how to enable HR teams to adopt tech and data to deliver better business outcomes. Coming up first, Anustup. Anustup is the director for Aon's Human Resource Learning Center and an expert in the total reward space. So the next 20 minutes, Anustup will walk you through some key insights, trends, and exciting data from the world of total rewards. Over to you, Anustup.
And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone from wherever all of you are joining around the world. All right, so over the next 15-20 odd minutes, I just want to quickly share a few key insights from a few surveys that we run globally every year. So the first one that I wanted to share with you was some insights from what we call as the salary increase survey. So why is salary increase so important for us? Salary increase actually gives us an indication of a bunch of things, right? So salary increase tells us how are different economies performing. Salary increases also tell us how inflations are getting, inflation numbers are moving around the world. It also gives us an indicator of the overall war for talent, right? What is the demand-supply equation for talent in various markets around the world? What we have seen historically, and I will let you absorb some of the numbers that are here in the slide. But what we have seen historically is that some of the more developed markets, such as US, Europe, Australia, Singapore, some of these markets have traditionally been lower in terms of their pay increases, while markets that are evolving, emerging, growing faster, such as China, India, Brazil, some of these markets, Indonesia, for example, have been significantly more aggressive in terms of the kind of pay increases that they would offer. We have seen a similar trend when it comes to inflation. We have seen a similar trend when it comes to growth. However, over the last few years, ever since COVID, we have seen a few economies that are developed experiencing high inflation and therefore relatively higher pay increases. However, if you look at some of these numbers that you see here, the last number actually gives you in each of the rows, the last digit numbers actually tell you the pay increases 2022 in the bottom, the actuals of 2022, and the predictions or projections for 2023 at the top. The middle numbers will actually give you the inflation figures that are taken from IMF. And if you just compare these two, the middle numbers and the last numbers, the rightmost numbers on your screens, what you would realize is that there have been a few economies where in 2022, there hasn't been any real pay increase. So as an economy, as a market, as an organized sector, people have actually lost money in 2022 because of high inflation numbers and because growth in those markets have not been able to follow the high inflation numbers. But at the same time, if you look at some of the faster growing markets, particularly China and India, in both of these markets, we have seen inflation numbers significantly lower than pay increases. In fact, there is a 4 to 5% or 40 to 50 basis point difference between pay increase and inflation. All right. So I also wanted to quickly move to a few interesting insights that come from the survey on how are preferences changing for people. Why are people choosing certain careers, certain career opportunities, certain organizations as compared to where they are? What we have seen, in fact, globally is that in 2021, inflation has actually bounced back from 2020's dip, where companies were not hiring, companies were actually around the world cutting down on their employee costs. Many of them actually reduced their overall workforce footprint. But in 2021 and 2022, we saw the attrition numbers bounce back globally. In fact, the attrition that happened globally in 2022 was actually the highest that we have ever recorded over the last 25 years. And some of the reasons for attrition is what you see here. Some of them have been common. External inequity in compensation has traditionally remained one of the highest, one of the topmost reasons for attrition, which kind of points towards the war for talent, that companies are actually finding difficult to get the right talent for doing various roles. This also points towards the fact that many organizations are actually today looking at new age skills, niche skills, digital skills, and the availability rewards. There are monetary or non-monetary recognition that organizations are doing, the work-life balance, interaction with managers, leadership accessibility, all of those things, while the reason for attrition kind of remains inequity of compensation. Now, one has to read between the lines and see that, when someone leaves, it is easiest to say that, it's because of compensation that they have left. But when we actually go to the employees and understand what they are preferring, we have seen a significant shift in preferences that employees had from 2019 to 2023. And this is from a different survey that we do, which is called the Employee Preference Survey. And if you look at employees' expectations from organizations, you will see that the topmost expectation has changed from just cash compensation to total compensation, which includes benefits, which includes your overall working environment, your long-term incentives, equity settled compensation, etc. We have also seen a bunch of new preferences featuring in the top 10 or top 8 in 2023, such as focusing on their own development, focusing on their work-life balance, focusing on purpose, health and wellness coverage that organizations provide. And this has been probably the most drastic change in this list of employee preferences pre and post COVID. Yeah, and then I just wanted to leave all of you with a brief of how we look at rewards in a more holistic manner. We believe that rewards actually should originate from a overarching strategy or philosophy around it, which in turn should stem from the business strategy. And then from there, some of the more tactical operational elements of rewards, such as how do you look at internal equity, how do you look at market competitiveness, how do you combine the two to design your overall pay structures, your incentives, your overall pay packages, your benefits. All of that should kind of stem from an overarching philosophy around rewards, which should ideally capture not just compensation, but also other elements of rewards, right? So if you look at this framework of total rewards, there is a need today that is clear from the employee preference survey as well, to look just beyond compensation and focus a bit more on development, focus a bit more on the overall culture and the environment that you're providing, and focus significantly more on benefits, including health, wellness, time off, work-life balance, and so on. I would just leave this group and I'll hand it over back to Shrikant with a view on how do you look at your rewards philosophy, how do you articulate your rewards philosophy, which can then in turn help you to look at some of these other elements. So in our point of view, we say that there are 6 pillars or 6 pay drivers that one should look at. That basically starts from your overall philosophy on how subjective or how objective should you be. Do you want to value the individual and pay for the talent, or do you want to value the job and pay for the role that the talent is fulfilling? How should you look at your approach towards pay, right? Should you look at differentiating each individual on individual performance, individual achievements, or do you want to incentivize the group? Do you want to focus on short-term achievements, or do you want to focus on long-term or long or mid-term achievements? Do you want to again focus on input parameters of a particular role holder, such as their seniority, their pedigree, their tenure, their experiences? Or do you want to focus on their immediate outcomes and their performance? And then do you want to look at differentiating pay for a few top talent and not differentiating so much for the rest? Or do you want to look at an overall distribution of pay to the larger population? Do you want to focus more internally? Do you want to focus more externally? How do you look at competitiveness or pay positioning, leveraged more through variable pay or long-term incentives? Yeah. So that's largely what I had. I would like to hand it back to Sriram.
Thank you very much, Anustup. We will now move to Shrikant. Shrikant will now walk you through the various equity compensation schemes, and then I will come back to you on how tech is being leveraged in total rewards. So we have a healthy mix of various concepts so that you have a lot of inputs in this space. Over to you, Vikram.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Sriram. So just as a quick introduction, so I'm Vikram. I head India and Middle East for Capita. I'll just give a very brief background of what we do at Capita. So we are a technology services company based out of Singapore. We operate primarily on the ESOP domain, and we acquired a company called ESOP Direct in India. While we are a startup with roughly been around for 4 years, ESOP Direct has spent more than 23 years solely focusing on the ESOP domain. So as a group today, we are relevant end to end for any requirements people may have on ESOPs, advisory, management of your ESOP scheme, either through our technology platform or through managed services, valuation, accounting, compliance, multiple things. Today we have close to 2,000 companies using our platform, and we manage close to $12 billion worth of ESOPs across 200,000 employees. So that's just a bit about what we do as a group. What we, every year, annually, we conduct a survey specific to equity compensation. But I'm just going to touch upon some highlights of the survey from last year, 2022. The 2023 survey is going on right now. By December, we should have a survey report out. So our survey, covered 300 companies across India and Southeast Asia, 22 sectors, covering a mix of both unlisted companies / startups and listed companies as well. So before I get into some specific data points, just our sort of a view on how we see ESOPs shaping up. And as a group, we have seen ESOPs over the last 2 decades. We have seen the first wave of ESOP wealth creation in India through the IT services majors, Infosys, Wipro, early 2000s, how many of the employees, once these companies got listed, made significant wealth and upside for themselves. We saw the next wave with the Indian startup boom, with the startup ecosystem taking off, with Flipkart becoming a big name in 2011, 2012, and an entire ecosystem growing around equity holders in these startups, how all of them were able to monetize, or most of them were able to monetize and set up their own companies and give out more equity. So it's like a virtuous cycle, which you can see in places like Bangalore, Delhi, Mumbai, etc. Why are we excited about equity compensation? We see it as a very critical tool, not just in listed companies and unlisted companies as well, to primarily drive retention, rewards, and drive performance within the organization as well. And more than anything, to create cultural changes in an organization to really make employees feel like owners rather than people who are just doing an assigned task, and thereby push the actions from their side towards long-term value creation, and not just optimizing for the short term. From an employee's perspective, it's a fantastic way for wealth creation, for employees to create non-linear wealth, much more than what they would have made, if they had just asked for cash compensation. So that's why we sort of are excited about what we do. I'll cover a few trends from the unlisted side, from the startup side across India, Southeast Asia, then quickly cover the listed companies as well. So the key question on everyone's mind at startups is, what is the impact of the funding winter going to be? Both from a company's perspective and from an employee's perspective. Do we see an impact of this on ESOPs? The answer is emphatically yes. We see a unique problem where startups actually are seeing more reliance on ESOPs because now funding is taking longer for them. They need to demonstrate more to get funding, and they really need to retain their talent and manage their cash flows at the same time. So we see a lot of startups making their ESOP schemes more attractive, reviewing their schemes, bringing it closer to market practices, and getting into like an annual grant cycle as well, rather than keeping it as an ad hoc activity. On the employee side, employees saw a phenomenal run, I would say maybe 2020 to 2022, when funding was fairly hot, and a lot of them saw personal wealth creation as well. Now they're seeing valuation markdowns. They're probably not as confident about their ESOPs as they used to be. Does it mean that they are, sort of not, as active on the ESOP side? Not really. But there is a lot more discussion and negotiation surrounding ESOPs, surrounding valuations, and surrounding liquidity as well from the employee side. How companies are managing it? More communication, more engagement, and efforts to really help employees understand the value of ESOPs and increase their perception of the value in ESOPs itself is how startups are primarily managing the funding winter. From a coverage perspective, over a longer period, we are seeing a trend towards broader coverage. So the traditional way of thinking about ESOPs to say, give it only to key management, give it only to the people who can actually influence the valuation of the company. We are seeing that, sort of mentality change to say now every employee should consider themselves an owner, even if the quantum is going to be low. The fact that they hold ESOPs in a company gives a different flavor to their engagement with the company. This also is far more pronounced in a certain sector. So if you're running a tech company or let's say a marketplace, an e-commerce company, etc., you will see more of a pressure. Employees actually asking for ESOPs. In certain other companies, maybe where they see a lot of attrition, it's a little bit lower. So the sector also influences the choice of coverage here. Our metrics from our side, we have seen more than close to 60% of companies are covering more than 10% of their overall workforce. Southeast Asia, is actually a bit more democratic. Close to 40% companies actually are covering 50% of their workforce under the ambit of equity compensation. Just a quick discussion on what structures we're seeing as well. That's like a webinar by itself. But very quickly, most companies prefer the standard employee stock option structure. There are some restrictions from a regulatory perspective if you're an Indian company. So if I intend to cover non-employees and give equity compensation to non-employees, I will have to look at cash settled structures like stock appreciation rights, SARs, or phantom stocks. That's driven more from a regulatory perspective. RSUs, again, in this geography, India, Southeast Asia, it has a very different connotation in the US. But in India, it pretty much operates like an ESOP, but with a very low strike price, so that there is a lot more benefit going to the employees. But the company takes a certain accounting charge. Most companies prefer, at an early stage, prefer to administer their ESOPs themselves. So anytime employees ask for exercise, the company issues the shares. But as companies mature, as they become larger, and especially as they start looking towards listing, they may want to set up an ESOP trust as well to ease the process of exercise, ease the administrative burden, and make it faster for employees to exercise their whole shares as well. So a critical question, which is increasingly, sort of gaining relevance, is liquidity. This is not a problem for a listed company or a person holding ESOPs in a listed company, but in an unlisted company, the employees will have this question to say, I am getting ESOPs, I may see value creation in the ESOPs. When can I actually see liquidity on these ESOPs? This was a very new concept, maybe 3-4 years back, but of late, we are sort of seeing this, especially in ecosystems like Bangalore, etc., where a lot of employees have actually seen the full cycle of ESOP wealth creation from grant to actually cash out. The questions are being raised to companies, to HR teams to say, I can understand the value of ESOPs, which is coming to me, but what plans do you have on liquidity? And when can I expect to see at least a partial realization of the wealth I'm creating for myself through these ESOPs? We have been tracking this and we play a role in this as well. So close to $1.5 billion worth of liquidity in India has been delivered to employees, but this is dominated by a few large companies. So just this year in July, Flipkart had a massive liquidity program when they sort of demerged from PhonePe. Employees of Flipkart, who are common employees, got close to $700 million of liquidity. So that's like almost half of what has been given over the last 4 years. So this is dominated by fairly mature, fairly late stage startups. But we are seeing even at a slightly earlier stage, Series C, Series D onward, employees asking this question and having expectations from a liquidity perspective. The funding winter has made it difficult for companies. They have to manage their expectations while managing cash flows as well. And one of the things which we are also, sort of pioneering in India and in Southeast Asia is third-party liquidity, where we actually find investors and have liquidity happen in a very periodic fashion without a dependency on the company's cash flows or a dependency on a large round of funding. So that's very briefly on the unlisted side. On the listed side, again, we are seeing like a bit of a boom cycle when it comes to public markets. That automatically makes ESOPs and equity compensation fairly attractive. So there is far more interest among a lot of public companies Even family-owned businesses, which typically were wary of diluting equity, a lot of them are seeing interest in using ESOPs, leveraging ESOPs as a compensation tool. But having said that, the coverage in listed companies, it's still, I would say, a bit more traditional, more towards CXO, senior management, although there is a slow movement towards a more universal coverage covering junior management as well. Again, it's unfair to expect 100% coverage like you see in unlisted companies, given the size of workforce in these listed companies. But we can see that it's slowly sort of happening. And inclusion of equity compensation as a core element of total rewards. So a lot of companies following an annual grant cycle, topping up ESOPs and giving more ESOPs to employees on a yearly basis, rather than making it ad hoc one-time activity or basically only covering CXOs when they join the company. So the way most companies want their employees to think about compensation is to say there's obviously cash, there is variable, and there are ESOPs as well. And we will keep topping off your ESOPs on a yearly basis. So as you go through the exercise and sale process, you will still have enough skin in the game from an ESOP perspective. Structurally, we are seeing some interesting changes on the public market side. So the prevailing practice was to price the ESOPs at or near the fair market value. And to ensure that employees get the benefit only if they see that appreciation in share price, that they're able to drive that appreciation in share price. But this also presents, some challenges for companies. Let's say they roll it out when the share was fairly high, and they see a correction, or if they sort of go through a bit of a downturn as a company or as a sector, then they see the sort of value delivery to employees and the interest in employees, motivation from employees also starting to dip. So we are now seeing a preference towards deep discounted ESOPs. Even a company as large as HDFC last year rolled out an RSU scheme of sorts where they priced their ESOPs at 1 rupee, so that employees and ESOP holders get an immediate benefit when the ESOPs are granted. They're able to actually calculate it, and the benefit only continues to grow if the share price sort of grows, but it really doesn't drop to zero even if they sort of see a dip in the share price. So in terms of a philosophical change, it's a shift towards increasing the rewards delivery to the employee, rather than trying to optimize on the accounting cost. So the challenge here is that these companies take on an accounting cost if they give deep discounted ESOPs, if they give these ESOPs at a significant discount to their FMBs. But increasingly, management, even the finance, the CFOs and the finance heads are becoming, sort of comfortable with this fact. And they're able to communicate this to their shareholders when they go out to shareholders for approvals, including proxy advisory firms, and convince them that, yes, this as a construct really will help to drive retentions and will deliver results for the shareholders over the long term. So that's just a few brief trends on the ESOP side. I'll turn it back to Sriram, and I can take questions on chat, or we'll have some time for Q&A as well. Over to you, Sriram.
Thank you very much, Vikram. I think what we will do is we have a lot of questions coming up, so we will definitely take it in a live format. So let me quickly share my screen. I'm going to walk you through the key aspects that we are really seeing from a technology application in the CNB space, right? But before we delve into it, the performance management landscape is vastly changing, right? I mean, no more performance management is an annual form-filling gala event where the HR teams chase the employees to fill up the forms and chase the managers to close it in the system. Today, it's become frequent, continuous performance conversations. And again, no more closed-door conversations. As a result of the pandemic, we are seeing a lot of remote tech-based discussions that are happening. OKRs are a lot of in focus only because there is a focus now on objectives and key results, are not just on the processes. The performance management entire process used to lack a lot of clarity earlier, but today, as we are seeing with the new tools coming in, it's a lot more clear and continuous communication. So it's 360 degrees and continuous through the year. Managers are expected to be more of mentors, and what is happening in a lot of companies today is that employees who are just consumers of their performance targets today are becoming creators, which means employees are telling the managers and the leadership, let us set our own targets in accordance with the organization's overall growth projections. So there are a lot of changes happening in the performance management landscape. And that's why we now have to start leveraging technology to meet these changing employee needs and requirements. So what is happening if you look at it? Technology today can be applied across the entire employee life cycle, strategic workforce planning, internal job marketplaces, for talent attraction, for hiring, for employee engagement, performance management, for sentiment analysis, learning and development, and finally, even for total rewards. We are seeing a number of new tools that are actually coming into the marketplace. And that's what we are going to be talking about in the next few slides. And what are the new tools that are in the marketplace that is changing the CNB space completely. Now, what we need to realize that today employees want better experience. They want a better pay for performance comp. No more you can say, hey, 40% of the organization will get this incentive, or this is the outcome for your performance. Just like how our LinkedIn feed or a Spotify feed is customized, employees today are looking for customized compensation and reward mechanism. With a lot of these new tools coming in, what it has done is it has brought in a lot of transparency into the process. It offers a lot more data security features. It's become more real time. So employees are able to access compensation data, their ESOP, long-term incentive data, more real time. So this has actually improved the HR efficiency and effectiveness, and thereby bringing down the overall HR operations costs. A lot of new Gen AI applications have helped automate, not just automate the process, but they are able to recognize trends and better predict employee performance. So the CNB teams are able to leverage it to come up with more customized reward mechanisms. Now, the key aspect that we would like to look at it is, these are the various trends that we are seeing. These are the various trending tools that we are seeing. For example, now companies are looking to hire wherever talent is located. And that's where you now have the concept of employer of records all over the ecosystem coming up. People like globalization partners, multiplier deal. What do? They have presence in 180 countries. They're able to hire your employees wherever you require them, compliant to the local laws and regulations. Then flexi pay, on-demand pay is becoming very important. 80% of global workforce is deskless workforce. 80% of the workforce globally is blue-collared workforce. What is gaining a lot of traction right now is earned wage access or on-demand pay. What does that mean? Essentially, if I work for 10 days, I use the app to get my 10 days of salary. Now, what this has helped is in Singapore, for example, you have a lot of cases of the along throwing red paint outside. Now, research has clearly shown that employees borrow loans which are typically less than the monthly salary. So if employers are able to provide on-demand salary for whatever they have worked in that particular month, if I work for 15 days, if I'm able to withdraw 15 days of my pay using an app, it is able to substantially bring in employee satisfaction because they are not going to borrow loans. There are a lot of rewards and recognition systems in the marketplace that are coming up, which are very, very customized for the employee. No more does the employee want something which is very generic. I get loyalty points, but I have very few options. No more is it. No more is that going to happen, because today employees now have an option of customizing their entire redemption of their rewards. Now, earlier we were talking about mental wellness a lot during the pandemic, but situations has now changed. People are talking about more holistic wellness. Holistic wellness actually talks about financial wellness, emotional wellness, mental wellness. All of this put together is creating that aspect of holistic wellness. But if you look at mental wellness today, no more are companies just giving an employee assistance program number and saying you can call them up if you have mental stress. Today, there are various data-driven mental wellness tools that are available, leveraging which CNB teams are able to identify employees who need support and offer them proactively. So there are a lot of such tools available which leverage tech and data to proactively identify people at risk and offer them support, rather than the traditional EAP methodology of reactive support. HR no more needs to be reactive. HR needs to be proactive and offer proactive support to employees. Now, compensation planning essentially has been happening on Excel sheets. Now, that is fast changing with compensation planning systems that are essentially coming up across the ecosystem. Products like Comport really have been helping CNB teams bring compensation onto a system. So if you're managing 100,000 employees across 20 different countries, across hundreds of different business units, no more is it happening on Excel sheets. So compensation planning is systems are able to help bring in that customization for every employee based on the role that they are doing, based on the country they are in, which through this compensation planning systems. Real-time labor market stats are available today, which has helped CNB teams benchmark their comp data at any point of time. You have various large consulting organizations that provide data. You also have SaaS models from Lightcast or a salary board, which provides that. Long-term recognition through equity compensation is becoming a key element, whether it is ESOPs or an RSU or a phantom stock, whatever is the equity compensation. You have product tools like Capita, which are really helping CNB teams not just design their equity compensation scheme, but even implement them in a SaaS method. So as an employee, I can go at any point of time, download my ESOP statement or my total rewards statement and look at what is the wealth that has been generated through my stock options. And finally, total rewards dashboards are increasingly coming in, which provides not just one dashboard for HR teams. It is also helping the employees know what is the total reward for them, which was the key aspect that Anustup had highlighted, saying that people are no more just looking at cash compensation. They are looking at a holistic total rewards total rewards aspect, which these dashboards are bringing in. So a lot of exciting tools are in the marketplace, which CNB teams are leveraging. In fact, today, some of the companies in North America are actually telling the new employees, I give you 3 offers. You choose what offer, right? One offer could be a high cash comp with a low variable comp. The other could be a very low cash comp and a high variable comp. The third offer could be a very large equity comp. Now, companies are telling the candidates, now choose what you want. That is where we are moving towards, that employers need to start providing candidates the option to choose the kind of compensation that they need to choose. So a lot of new technology tools are coming in. I would encourage you to go to our resources section to download some of the case studies, for example, on how Persistent Systems and both have been able to leverage Capita for exercise options, or how Dr. Reddy's in India has leveraged Comport, how AIA in Singapore has leveraged rewards for their seamless rewards and recognition. So a lot of new case studies are available for you to download and see what has been the impact. Now, I probably pause there. And before we go back to some other aspects, I would like to address the questions at this point of time. Maybe can I request Anustup to take the first question? Anustup, this is the question from Ritu on what is the typical percentage allocation for benefit distribution, particularly what is the average expenditure you are observed for backup care benefits?
Well, it varies from sector to sector. When we look at and it also completely depends on the kind of pyramid that you have as an organization. Typically, in manufacturing kind of sectors, the overall total employee benefit expenses would typically range anywhere between, and this is non-cash compensation, it would range anywhere between 2 to 3% of the total revenue. And it goes as high as 15 to 20% of the total revenue for services organizations, especially if you are into IT services or financial services with a fairly large headcount. So essentially, it's a function of whether you are top heavy or bottom heavy. Top heavy organizations typically tend to spend a bit more. Professional services, consulting firms, legal advisory firms, those are slightly more middle to top heavy organizations. They typically tend to spend a bit more. Manufacturing organizations, distribution-led organizations that have a large feet on street population, and their pyramids are a bit bottom heavy, they typically are between 2 to 3%, and they have another 4 to 5% on cash compensation, both including current cash incentives and retirement cash benefits.
Anusub, how about the follow-up question from Ritu, which talks about providing insights into whether organizations are effectively measuring productivity loss, absenteeism, and missed work days?
So there are two ways to look at it. So after COVID, what we have seen is there has been a significant investment in tools that can measure absenteeism, measure number of hours that an employee is putting in, tracking productive hours, etc. And there have been various numerous studies and surveys that have actually shown that the productivity, while the number of hours have gone up, the outcome has not commensurately moved up, right? So the productivity therefore technically has kind of gone down. However, my sense is that it is we are still in a bit of a flux when it comes to the mode of work that people would do. As Sriram, you rightly mentioned, a lot of people are without desks today. A lot of people are working in a hybrid kind of a model. So it is not that easy to put a number on productivity. It is not easy to say how many hours are people working. But wherever organizations have put those measures, they have found that the number of hours have actually gone up. The output has not gone up to that extent.
Thank you, Anusub. Vikram, this is a question on, does LTI really work as a strong retention tool, especially for these generation of employees? We all know 5 generations are in the workforce right now, but does LTI really work as a strong retention tool?
So it depends on the sector, on the role sector, etc. It is not something which is for everyone. For example, a segment which is seeing a fair bit of attrition, the employees are probably not going to think long term in terms of their tenure in the organization. I think LTI or ESOPs as a subset of LTI makes sense where there is a certain cost for replacement. And there's a certain learning curve for employees. So as an organization, if you feel, yes, an employee who's been with me for 3 years is much more valuable for me as compared to a person who's just been with me for 6 months or so, then from an organization's perspective, it makes a lot of sense. Then it just falls down to how you communicate it. So if you're really able to communicate this LTI effectively to the employees, you should be able to achieve your objective of retention. And that's ultimately what anyone rolling out an LTI wants to do. Again, failures may happen in terms of not making it attractive enough, and not engaging, communicating enough. And typically, it's not the first one; it's the second one that we see companies, sort of falter. And not like other than just rolling it out, not really having, or the top management not really having as much belief in the program itself. And that is why we see these sort of structures failing. But yes, overall, companies which have gone down the path of implementing it, at least our survey seems to suggest more than 90% feel that their objectives have been achieved.
Thanks, Vikram. So this is a question to you, Anusub, in terms of skills-based hiring. In fact, there are a couple of questions from Sindhil and from Lakshmi on skills-based hiring. In fact, we just completed a project for the Institute for Human Resource Professionals on skills-based hiring for Singapore enterprises. Now, that's a lot of trend focusing on that. So job benchmarking versus skill benchmarking changes in the industries. Do you want to talk about some of these aspects?
Yeah, sure. I think this is a very interesting trend that we are seeing, especially the sectors that have a convergence with technology. For example, for example, financial services or fintech, edutech, agri-tech, automotive. A lot of these organizations, and if you remember the employee preference survey that I was talking about, um, let me just put that back up on the screen, because that's a very relevant point that, in my opinion, is not discussed enough today and merits a bit more of focus. But one of the changing preferences that we saw in 2023 as compared to 2019 was focus on skill, right? If you look at number 3 here, so what is this whole noise around skill development? So what employees are saying today is that I want to focus on a particular area of expertise that can make me employable across different sectors, across different organizations, as compared to career growth that used to feature earlier in number 3, where employees would say that I want career growth in my own organization over a longer period of time. And you would see this trend take place globally, that the average tenure, at least over the last 5 to 6 years, have consistently gone down. And if you look at the newer generation of workforce, there the average tenure is even lesser. So what people are actually saying is that, and organizations have kind of agreed to this fact, they have succumbed to this fact that we cannot expect long tenures of, say, 5, 10, 15 years in an organization anymore, right? So what we need to focus on is the kind of skills that we need right now at this point in time, and over the next 3 years we are sure that those skills will change, we'll move on to new skills, and we will therefore need different people or people with different skills. And that has kind of translated across the entire talent life cycle, right? Whether it is talent management, whether it is compensation, whether it is career architecture, job architecture, all of those talent processes are today focused around skills and competencies. So again, a very interesting question, but what we see is that it is not just organizations, it is also employees that are probably benefiting from from this approach of focusing on specific skills and areas of expertise. Let me take the slide back.
Thank you, Anushtap. So, Vikram, this question is from Kunal on most of the startups give equity amounts which are very high, and at times it is getting difficult to match such offers for established firms. So, and especially more at the senior brand. So, how do we manage this situation?
It's a very, very good question. So, from a startup's perspective, literally that element of upside is the only thing which they can show or wave in front of an employee, because as a startup they want good talent, and they want to create an argument for an employee to leave a well-established brand and come and join and suffer the risk of a startup, right? So if I was working in I am working in a startup, but if I was, let's say, communicating to an employee on this, then I will always project my future value. And most of, not just the employees, even the founders, investors, and startups are doing what they're doing with an eye on the future. So that are some, sort of expectations as to what we will deliver and where we can expect our valuation to be as a startup in the future. So if I'm having a conversation on compensation on ESOPs, and I will project that value and project a value for the ESOPs on where I believe my value will be in the future, and communicate that to an employee. Now, you are very right to say that, yes, it will be a high value, which the startups are going to be putting out. But what should be covered, if it's not covered in the conversation, is the element of risk here. So as a startup, my journey and my path involves a lot of risk, and that's where the reward comes in. So there is a certain risk-reward equation there. As a startup, I have a high chance of mortality. We may go down this path, our business model may not work, and we may need to shut the startup down. And in those situations, the ESOP holder is not going to make anything on the ESOPs. So assuming that things go well and the employee carries this risk as being part of the startup, yes, the employee is entitled to a certain high return. Now, employees may not appreciate this, but if I was sitting in, let's say, an established company side, that is what I will highlight to say that, yes, you want to join a startup, that high reward, you will potentially make a lot more on ESOPs, but you're taking a high risk and there's a good chance you may make nothing out of it. Whereas at a more mature company, I'm not going to give you and I'm not going to match what a startup is offering from an equity upside perspective, but I'm giving you a lot of stability. And even if I give you a long-term incentive and an ESOP in that sense, it will have a certain growth path. Maybe you'll make 30% more as compared to your current sort of cash salary, but you have a far better chance of actually making that in cash as compared to a startup. So from an employee's perspective, people who understand this, they're able to weigh the pros and cons, and they're able to take a decision based on their perception of risk and their sort of risk reward assessment. But from a company's perspective, if this is not communicated correctly, then this causes some sort of mismatched expectations in the future. So if I join a startup and the company promises me like a 5x sort of growth and or a 10x growth in the ESOP value, then without even talking about the risk, then that's a bit unethical, and that's something which will create problems for the company going forward. So I hope that answers.
Yeah. Thanks, Vikram. In fact, Anustup, before we proceed to the other couple of questions, I would like to highlight to the audience on the session that we plan to have on 5th October, which is actually a double click of whatever we are covering today. It's going to be a 3-hour hands-on workshop that we are doing with Aon. And Anustup will essentially walk you through the entire aspect of whatever we have covered today in much more detail, right? So Anustup, do you want to quickly give an overview of what will be covered during this session before we go back to the questions?
Sure. Let me just project my screen. Yeah, so essentially on 5th, what we are going to do is it's going to be a 3-hour session, as Sriram rightly mentioned. So what we are going to do is, the way we are structuring this is through the lens of this overall rewards lifecycle. As you know, as a consulting firm, Aon does a lot of work across all of these elements in the overall rewards lifecycle. So we already spoke a bit about reward strategy, the overall comp philosophy, the various pay drivers. From there, we'll actually go, into a bit of detail on how do you look at internal equity, how do you look at placement of various jobs within a structure of grades or levels in your organization. What are the various ways of evaluating jobs, right? And we'll go a bit deeper into the point factor method as well. I'll be happy to share our own methodology of that we follow as Aon, which is called job link. But in general, what point factor is, what factor comparison is, what are the various other ways of evaluating jobs, and how do you look at internal equity from there. We will also have a look at one of the most well-established practices that we have around the world, which is market benchmarking and designing fixed pay structures. And we'll obviously focus on the overall life cycle of market benchmarking, the various steps that are involved to do market benchmarking effectively. But we'll draw special attention to a few key elements of market benchmarking, which is how do you look at doing job matching the right way? What are the various elements in job matching that you should focus on? What are the various aspects in various job families that you should focus on? If you are looking at finance, HR versus commercial, manufacturing, what really changes with different kinds of jobs that you should look at? What kind of questions should you ask your survey provider, your data provider, to ensure that the job matching is done correctly? And we'll also look into a bit of how can you draw more insights from the data, from the report that you get from the benchmarking analysis. So what are the various parts? What are the various aspects to the report that can help you draw more insights, more information than what meets the eye? And again, the more questions you ask, the more answers you get, the richer your experience becomes, the better decisions you can make. We'll also talk a bit about how do you use both your internal equity and the data that you get from the market to design pay structures for your organization. What are the various elements of a pay structure? what are the things that you must keep in mind, what makes a good pay structure, and what are the red flags that you should really keep an eye out on. And we will of course end with a brief overview on incentives, right? So far we have spoken about fixed pay. We will have a broad overview on incentives, both short-term incentives and long-term incentives. And essentially we will try to do both the things. We'll look at how do you design an incentive plan, either short-term or long-term. And if you of course have a plan that is existing, how do you critique that plan, right? How do you look at whether the right people are eligible for the plan, whether the kind of plan that you have is correct or not? For example, as Vikram mentioned, the kind of if the objective of the plan is to retain people, is the plan actually incentivizing performance more than retention, right? So is the plan meeting the objective that you have set out for? How are you funding the plan? Where is the money coming from? What kind of performance measures are you looking at? It should not, are the performance measures balancing various priorities that the organization has? How do you link performance levels to pay? So what kind of performance should result in what kind of payout? How do you apply various weightages to different measures to ensure that you are aligned to the organization strategy? And how do you get it all together to build a holistic plan for yourself, or again, critique the plan that you already have in a holistic manner? Yeah, so that is what we are going to talk about in the session. I would of course look forward to meeting all of you there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anustup. Anustup, so quick add-on question that has come up, right? So do companies consider ESOP as part of CTC, or is it more of a retention and benefit component? How do we define total compensation in terms of elements to be included? So these are two questions from Aditya and one more anonymous, which I would like to combine.
So I'll give it a shot, and of course Vikram is the subject matter expert on this one. I would request Vikram also to comment on. But there is a valuation methodology that organizations should ideally follow if they are deploying equity settled long-term incentive plans, such as employee stock options or restricted stock units, or any other equity settled plan. And that fair, the fair valuation that gets derived out of that plan should ideally be added to the CTC structure after looking at how the plan is vested over a period of time. However, what organizations tend to do, and which is something that we strongly advise them not to, is to not take a fair value using, say, any of the valuation methodologies, Monte Carlo, Black-Scholes, any of them, but take the value of the underlying stock itself and add that entire value to the CTC. Now, as an employee, as well as an employer, one has to be careful when they do that, because a lot of these long-term incentives are actually appreciation-based plans, where the value that the employee gets is only on the appreciation of the stock and not on the full stock itself. So that is something that we need to watch out for. While we are hiring people from different companies, they come up with offer letters saying that we have 500 stock options, and this is the value of the stock. So 500 multiplied by that value is the total amount, which actually it is not. Yeah, Vikram, if you want to add something on that one.
No, completely echo your thoughts, Anustup. So it's unfortunate that today there is no actual standard which companies are required to follow or typically follow when they talk about equity stock-based compensation. So as Anustup said, we also have seen situations where either companies or even candidates, when they negotiate offers, give the value of the underlying stock and say, this is what my compensation is. But no, there is a certain exercise price which you need to pay to acquire the shares, and the difference is really what your ESOPs are worth. Number one. Number two, how much have you vested? So you've not vested everything. You're probably leaving the company after 1 year or 2 years of vesting. So that is what your actual value is. And if you're working in an unlisted company, the third complexity of even liquidity comes in, that you may have a certain attractive value today, but how likely is it that you'll get this value in cash? And there's a risk associated with it. So have you priced in that risk, right? The best way, as Anustup said, is there is a very formal, sort of means of valuing ESOPs itself, and companies can follow that as a standard to say this is what your ESOPs are worth. But the right thing to do is to probably call it out. When from a company communicating to an employee's perspective, to be very ethical in the way you're sort of communicating, is to say this is cash, and cash is going to be what it is, and there's no variability there. And this is an element of ESOPs. The ESOPs are worth something today. They may be worth something more, hopefully, in the future as well, and that's what we are sort of shooting towards, right? But there is an option. There is a sort of a probability associated with it. The value can remain the same. It can go higher. It can go lower, right? The best way for a company to do it is to present all these scenarios, so the employees have a complete picture. But at the very least, to not present only the optimistic scenario. I think at least that is something which companies should follow. When they talk about or when they report on this compensation, and when they communicate this to their employees.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Vikram. We probably have time for just one last question. So maybe I will post one to each one of you. So Vikram, would you want to provide the difference between PSU and ESOP? And Anustup, the question to you is on, if someone mid to senior level is embarking on CNB, what is the recommendation for training or certification? So maybe we go with Vikram first.
Sure. So I guess the term is RSU, restricted stock unit. So I'll answer it from an Indian context. The answer will be different for a US company. RSUs mean something very different in US versus India. In India, it's very simple. An RSU just operates exactly like an ESOP, but where the exercise price is set to the lowest number possible, which is pretty much the face value of the share. So I can have an ESOP which, where the share value is, let's say, 100 rupees, where the exercise price is set at, let's say, 80 rupees. Because in listed companies and mature companies, it is common to ask for a set an exercise price close to the fair market value. So if I look at this ESOP today, the value of this ESOP is 20 rupees. Whatever is the share value, less whatever I need to pay to acquire the shares. Now the hope is that the 100 increases, where the 80 remains flat. So 100 may become 200, 300, etc. So over a period of time, the value of my ESOP increases. In an RSU, I'm going to set this value at the lowest permissible price, which probably is 10 rupees, which is the face value of the share. So from an employee's perspective, there's a lot more benefit. There's almost 90 rupees per ESOP or per RSU, which is going to an employee as compared to 20 rupees in my first example. But companies also adjust this in terms of an overall rewards. So my intent is to offer 10 lakhs worth of benefit of reward today through equity upside. So if I'm offering, an instrument which is worth 90, I'm going to give lesser number of those instruments. So I'll have lesser RSUs. The benefit with an RSU is that the chance of it going underwater, and I think that was another question which people asked, is going to be fairly minimal, because there's going to be a very wide difference between the fair market value of the share versus the face value. I mean, it bodes very badly for a company if the share valuation goes below the face value. It's very, very, it's not a very common occurrence. But if I'm talking about a listed company or even unlisted companies, if I do a down round, there may be a chance that my fair market value in the future goes below my exercise price, in which case my options are underwater. My ESOPs are worth nothing, right? So the chance of an ESOP actually being worth nothing is much lower with an RSU. But the flip side of that is that companies take a higher accounting charge when they offer RSUs as compared to ESOPs. So there's a wide difference between the fair market value versus what I'm giving it to you for, the exercise price. So the difference is shown over the vesting period, and there's a certain P&L hit which the companies take. So if companies are comfortable with this hit, and if they really want to pass on a higher benefit to employees and basically have lower dilution, because higher benefit is being passed on with a lesser number of units, then they will go in for an RSU. That's a case, I would say, for a lot of unlisted companies. A lot of startups pretty much prefer to keep things very simple, price it at the lowest sort of price possible. But companies which are let's say on the path to go public, which feel they need to manage their P&L P&L impact and profits, then they will find it a struggle to actually give RSUs. They will have to give it closer to the fair market value or a slight discount to the fair market value.
Thanks, Vikram. So performance share unit, restricted stock unit, ESOPs, whatever it is, I think we've been able to provide a lot of clarity. Thanks, Vikram. Finally, Anustup, to you on the certification or training that's required for senior to mid-career professionals.
Sure. So if you have already done a few years of rewards, or you are starting out in your journey in rewards, either way, I think the one program that helps, and I'm going to talk about Aeon's own certification programs because I really haven't done the others. So the one that really helps you get a overall holistic view on what rewards entails, what are the various aspects in total rewards, what are the how should you look at the entire rewards life cycle. Quite an extended version of what you saw a while back. So there is this program called Certified Rewards Ready that can actually give you a good overview of everything that a rewards professional needs to do. In addition to that, there are 3 other programs that we have at Aeon which are focused on rewards. One is a program on long-term incentives. The program on long-term incentives actually, again, looks at every aspect of long-term incentives, the various kind of instruments, valuation, financial modeling, a grant quantum determination, designing a long-term incentive plan, and so on. There is a program on sales compensation, specifically on sales compensation, sales incentives, sales force effectiveness, from a lens of compensation. And then there is a program on job evaluation, right? And there we again go into much more detail on the Aeon's proprietary job link methodology that is based on the point factor method of job evaluation. So these are the 3, I would say, slightly more advanced programs in rewards. But even the rewards ready program that gives you an overview of everything that we do in rewards, I think that is one of the best, I would say one of the programs that has the highest uptake, and we get one of the best feedback from that program across different career levels. So I would also encourage you to have a look at that one.
Thank you once again for joining us. We really look forward to seeing you at our October 5th workshop and the subsequent events. For any questions and queries, feel free to reach out to Sriram at HRTech.sg or Maya at HRTech.sg, and we expect to come back to you with the answers. Thank you once again, and thank you again, Anustup and Vikram.
Thank you,
Thank
Sriram.
you.
Pleasure.